In this demo, we will cover validation on put. The first question that pops up then is, isn't this exactly the same as on post? Well, for some, if not most resources, that's probably the case. But it doesn't have to be. A good use case may be those registration forms on fancy startup company sites. They want to onboard you as soon as possible, and they want to make the process frictionless. For example, they're not going to ask you to fill out tens of pieces of information on yourself on registration. But once you start using the service more, they might ask for more information. And then that information is required, like credit card info if you want to order something via their service. In our case, we could say that we want to make it easy for admins to create a course. Only inputting a title should be sufficient. An empty description is allowed. But if an admin wants the course to appear on a site, well, then they must fill out the description as well. That means that in our course for update DTO, we will require a description to be filled out. And that is, again, a good reason to separate out the DTOs for update and create. On screen, we currently see the course for update DTO. This should have the same rules as the course for creation DTO. Let's start with copying over the attributes from the course for creation DTO. And let me import the necessary namespace. We will now add one additional required attribute, stating that the description should also be filled out. And there we go, that will work. However, this doesn't really feel good. Let's put the course for update DTO next to the course for creation DTO. That's a lot of duplicate validation annotations. And to be honest, duplicate properties as well. Whenever possible, I prefer to minimize the amount of duplicate code. And we can do that. We can create an abstract base class that will serve as the base class for both of these DTOs. So let's add a new class and let's name it Course for Manipulation DTO. We mark it with the abstract keyword because we don't want this class to be used on its own. It must be derived from. Using the abstract modifier in a class declaration indicates that a class is intended only to be a base class of other classes. And then we simply let our other two classes derive from it. And we can get rid of what's in here. And we could now do the same for our course for update DTO. Simply delete all this. But that would pose a bit of a problem. We still need to be able to apply that required attribute to the description for the course for update DTO, preferably without having to copy the max length for description to both classes. One possible approach is marking description as abstract. That states that the description member must be implemented in classes that derive from the abstract class. But if we now switch back to the course for creation DTO, we see that we have a red squiggly line here. We have to implement the abstract base class, which means we have to implement the description property on the course for creation DTO. And that is also not ideal. It doesn't make sense to implement this member on this class, as it is already in the base class, and implementing it here doesn't add anything. If anything, it means that we again have more code duplication than is necessary. So let's get rid of that. The abstract modifier is great when there is no default implementation for a property. In our case, however, we have that default implementation. A max length attribute is applied to our description property, and the description property is initialized. So it gets a default value. Instead of using the abstract modifier, we can use the virtual modifier. Virtual properties are great when you have an implementation in the base class, which we have, but we do want to allow overriding it when it's necessary. Alright, we can leave our course for creation DTO as is, and in our course for update DTO, we can now override the description. So we get rid of the title and the associated attributes, and we override the description. Here we can now add our additional validation annotation. The validation annotations on the properties on the base class will still apply, but for the course for update DTO, the additional required annotation will apply as well. Let's give this a try. We're back in Postman, and we've still got that request to create a course for an author lined up here. Its title is too long, so it previously returned 422. Let's see if that still works. And we still see the same error message. This means that the validation rules we applied at the base class level, so in the abstract course for manipulation DTO class, still apply here. So far for creation. Let's switch to updating a course. I've got a few test requests lined up here. Let's say we want to send an update with null for the course title and a description that is too long. We get back that we should fill out the title and that the description shouldn't be this long. These are two annotations from the abstract base class, from course for manipulation DTO. That means that even though we override the description property in our course for update DTO, the validation annotation applied at the base class level is still working. Now let's try sending one without the description filled out. This payload would work for a post request, but it shouldn't for put. The fact that the description is required, the required annotation is only applied at level of the course for update DTO. And indeed, we get back that we should fill out the description. The annotation worked. Now let's try sending one with null for title and description. And we see that we not only get a rule from the base class on the title that fails, but also a rule we applied to the course for update DTO class. And like that, we know how to work with different rules for post and put, why this is a valid use case, and how to minimize code duplication. That's it for this demo. Let's continue with learning how to deal with cross-property and class-level validation in the upcoming demos.